Brock Franklin. First, I'll uncover the shocking world of Brock Franklin, the mastermind behind a notorious human trafficking ring.
In Arapahoe County, a man is sentenced to what could be the longest sentence ever given in a human trafficking case in the United States. Brock Franklin received 400 years in prison.
Brock Franklin's reign of terror began with his sinister recruitment tactics, targeting vulnerable young girls and women and forcing them into a life of prostitution. Through manipulation, coercion, and exploitation, Franklin preyed on their vulnerabilities, luring them into his web of deceit. These unsuspecting victims were promised a better life, only to find themselves trapped in a nightmare they could never have imagined. Using various methods, Franklin would approach his targets, often through social media platforms like Facebook, where he would establish a false sense of trust and connection. He would exploit their desperation, offering them false promises of love, protection, and financial stability. Once he gained their trust, he would gradually introduce them to the dark world of prostitution. Under Franklin's control, these young girls and women were subjected to unimaginable horrors. They were stripped of their autonomy and forced to comply with his demands. Physical abuse and threats were used as tools of control, ensuring their submission to his twisted desires. The victims, trapped in a cycle of fear and manipulation, had no choice but to comply with Franklin's demands. They were taken to hotels across the Metro Denver area, where they were forced to engage in sexual acts with clients, their bodies treated as commodities to be bought and sold. The depths of Franklin's depravity knew no bounds. Not only did he profit from their exploitation, but he also subjected them to further humiliation by selling their services online. These innocent lives were reduced to mere transactions, their dignity and humanity stripped away. As the leader of a notorious human trafficking ring, Brock Franklin's reign of terror came to a halt when he was finally brought to justice. In 2015, a statewide grand jury indicted Franklin and 6 others under Colorado's Organized Crime Control Act, exposing the extent of their criminal enterprise. The charges against Franklin were extensive, reflecting the gravity of his crimes. He was found guilty of 30 counts, including soliciting for child prostitution, sexual assault, and kidnapping. These charges painted a vivid picture of the horrors inflicted upon his victims and the depths of his depravity. Throughout the trial, it became evident that Franklin held a position of power within the trafficking ring. He orchestrated the recruitment, controlled the operations, and profited from the exploitation of these vulnerable individuals. His manipulation and coercion tactics were the driving force behind the ring's operations, ensuring the compliance of his victims through fear and abuse. The prosecution presented a compelling case, with 3 girls and 5 women bravely cooperating and providing crucial testimony. Their accounts shed light on the inner workings of the trafficking ring and the immense suffering endured by those caught in its grip. During the trial, the victims displayed immense courage as they took the stand to share their harrowing experiences. Their testimonies provided a chilling glimpse into the depths of Franklin's depravity and the lasting effects of his crimes. One victim, Brehana Leary, bravely spoke out stating, "I can't begin to even explain what he did to my life." Her words echoed the sentiments of all the survivors who had their innocence stolen and their trust shattered by Franklin's manipulation.
Reading it today and speaking and actually saying how I felt, and him hearing and having to sit there and listen to me, that brought me so much joy, and that's why I came today.
For many of these victims, testifying in court was a cathartic and empowering experience. It allowed them to reclaim their voices and confront their abuser directly. The courtroom became a platform for their stories to be heard, their pain acknowledged, and their resilience celebrated. Their testimonies not only shed light on the horrors of human trafficking, but also served as a rallying cry for justice. Their bravery inspired others to come forward and expose the urgent need for society to address the pervasive issue of sex trafficking. The sentencing hearing for Brock Franklin marked a historic moment in the fight against human trafficking. The judge handed down an unprecedented sentence of 472 years in prison, the longest ever given for a human trafficking case in U.S. history. This decision sent shockwaves through the courtroom and beyond, serving as a stern warning to those who perpetrate such heinous crimes. The significance of this sentence cannot be overstated. It serves as a powerful deterrent, sending a clear message that the exploitation and abuse of women and vulnerable populations will not be tolerated. Janet Drake, from the Colorado Attorney General's office, emphasized the importance of this sentence, stating, "A 400-year sentence sends a strong message across the country. While the sentencing of Brock Franklin brings a sense of closure to his victims and the community, it is crucial to recognize that the fight against sex trafficking is far from over. The case of Franklin serves as a stark reminder of the ongoing issue and the need for continued vigilance and support for survivors. Sex trafficking continues to plague our society, preying on the vulnerable vulnerabilities of individuals and exploiting their desperation. It is a crime that knows no boundaries, affecting people of all ages, genders, and backgrounds. The shocking nature of Franklin's crimes underscores the urgent need for comprehensive measures to combat this pervasive problem. To effectively address sex trafficking, it is essential to focus on prevention, intervention, and support for survivors. Education and awareness campaigns are vital in equipping individuals with the knowledge to recognize the signs of trafficking and take action. Additionally, providing resources and safe spaces for survivors to heal and rebuild their lives is crucial in their journey towards recovery. Peter Kitt. Next is the shocking story of Peter Kitt, a name that has become synonymous with the darkest depths of human trafficking.
There are still times that I freeze in public because I think I see his face.
Peter Kitt, a name that strikes fear into the hearts of those who have crossed paths with him. His crimes are nothing short of unimaginable, leaving a trail of destruction and shattered lives in his wake. In this section, we will delve into the horrifying details of the crimes committed by Peter Kitt, shedding light on the darkness that consumed his victims. Kitt's modus operandi was as insidious as it was calculated. He preyed on vulnerable women, seeking out those who had already experienced trauma and hardship in their lives. Like a predator, he would strike when they were at their weakest, exploiting their vulnerabilities for his own sadistic pleasure. Once he had identified his targets, Kitt would use a combination of drugs, threats, and violence to force these women into a life of prostitution. He would manipulate them, breaking down their spirits and subjecting them to unspeakable acts of abuse. The survivors, who have bravely come forward, recount the horrors they endured at the hands of this monster. One survivor, whose identity we will protect, shares her harrowing experience. She was sold like a piece of property, beaten mercilessly, and tortured in unimaginable ways. The physical scars she carries are a constant reminder of the pain she endured, but it is the emotional scars that run even deeper, forever etched in her heart and soul. Another survivor, who managed to escape Kitt's clutches, reveals the extent of the degradation she suffered. She describes how she was stripped of her dignity, forced to sell her body to satisfy Kitt's insatiable appetite for power and control. The psychological trauma she endured is immeasurable, leaving her with a lifetime of healing ahead. It is important to note that Kitt's crimes were not limited to physical and sexual abuse. He also manipulated his victims through psychological coercion, using fear and intimidation to maintain control. He would isolate them from their loved ones, making them believe that there was no escape from his clutches. The survivors recount the constant state of fear they lived in, always looking over their shoulders, never knowing when Kitt would strike next. After years of terrorizing the lives of countless women, Peter Kitt's reign of darkness finally came to an end. Law enforcement agencies had been aware of Kitt's activities for some time, but gathering enough evidence to bring him to justice proved to be a daunting task. Kitt operated with a level of cunning and secrecy that made it difficult for authorities to penetrate his criminal network. However, a breakthrough came when one brave survivor found the strength to come forward and share her story. Her testimony provided the crucial evidence needed to build a case against Kitt. Investigators meticulously pieced together the puzzle, uncovering a web of deceit, manipulation, and violence. The survivors, who had suffered in silence for far too long, finally had their voices heard. The charges brought against Kitt were extensive and reflected the severity of his crimes. He faced multiple counts of human trafficking, assault, rape, and torture. The prosecution painted a vivid picture of the horrors inflicted upon the victims, leaving no doubt in the minds of the jury about Kitt's guilt. The trial took place in the Pinellas County Justice Center, where a handful of the survivors bravely faced their tormentor in court. The atmosphere was tense as Kitt's victims, supported by their loved ones, confronted the man who had caused them unimaginable pain. Their courage and resilience were palpable, serving as a powerful reminder that they were no longer victims, but survivors. The courtroom proceedings were emotionally charged as the survivors recounted their harrowing experiences and the lasting impact it had on their lives. Kitt, however, showed no remorse. He sat in the defendant's chair, seemingly unaffected by the pain he had inflicted upon others. His arrogance and lack of empathy only fueled the determination of the prosecution to secure a conviction. After a thorough presentation of evidence and powerful testimonies, the jury reached a unanimous verdict: guilty on all charges. The courtroom erupted in a mix of relief, tears, and a sense of justice finally being served. Kitt's reign of terror had come to an end, and his victims could begin the long process of healing. The judge, fully aware of the gravity of Kitt's crimes, handed down a sentence that would ensure he would never harm another innocent life. Kitt was sentenced to 30 years in prison, a punishment that reflected the severity of his actions. However, it is important to acknowledge that no sentence can fully repair the damage done to the survivors. Their journey towards healing and reclaiming their lives is ongoing, but Kitt felt absolutely no remorse and took no responsibility.
For all the things these people came and said, I honestly I'm sorry that y'all felt that way. I forgive you.
As Kit was led away in handcuffs, his victims found solace in the fact that they had finally taken back their power. They had faced their abuser, spoken their truth, and witnessed him being held accountable for his actions. It was a bittersweet victory, but a victory nonetheless. For the survivors, the trauma inflicted by Kit's crimes is something that will forever be a part of their lives. The physical scars may heal, but the emotional wounds run deep. They have been forced to confront the darkest aspects of humanity, enduring unimaginable pain and suffering. The aftermath of the abuse has left the survivors grappling with a range of emotions. They have experienced feelings of shame, guilt, and self-blame, despite knowing deep down that they were victims of a manipulative and sadistic predator. The road to recovery is long and arduous, but these survivors are determined to reclaim their lives. Raymond Radio. Next, Raymond Rodeo, a man from Suffolk County who has been sentenced to 9.5 years in prison for his involvement in a sex trafficking operation.
The man accused of running a prostitution ring out of his parents' basement.
47-year-old Raymond Rodeo, the third, was taken into custody.
Raymond Rodeo's sex trafficking operation was nothing short of horrifying. He kept his victims in a sex dungeon located in his parents' basement, subjecting them to deplorable conditions that no human being should ever endure. The basement, which was transformed into a chamber of suffering, became a prison for approximately 20 young women. The walls were adorned with chains and restraints, serving as a constant reminder of the control Rodeo exerted over his victims. The air was thick with fear and despair as these women were stripped of their freedom and forced into a life of unimaginable torment. The dungeon lacked basic amenities and was designed solely for the purpose of exploiting these vulnerable individuals. The space was cramped, with barely enough room for the victims to move around. The stench of filth and decay permeated the air as Rodeo neglected even the most basic standards of hygiene. To further assert his dominance and instill fear, Rodeo resorted to branding his victims with cigarette butts. The scars left behind were not only physical, but also served as a constant reminder of the power he held over their lives. These women were reduced to mere objects, stripped of their dignity and subjected to unspeakable acts of violence. Rodeo's control over his victims extended beyond the physical realm. He manipulated them through a combination of psychological coercion and addiction. By providing drugs, he ensured their dependence on him, making it nearly impossible for them to escape his clutches. The victims were trapped in a vicious cycle of addiction and exploitation, their lives held hostage by Rodeo's cruel intentions. The impact of Rodeo's actions on the victims and their families cannot be overstated. Lives were shattered, dreams were destroyed, and innocence was stolen. One victim, Danielle Saunders, tragically lost her life to an overdose, a devastating consequence of Rodeo's manipulation and abuse. Her mother, Stacy Saunders, spoke of the pain and anguish caused by Rodeo's actions, emphasizing that her daughter did not deserve such a fate. The discovery of Rodeo's sex trafficking operation was a result of a routine traffic stop that led authorities to uncover the unimaginable horrors taking place in his parents' basement. As the details of Raymond Rodeo's sex trafficking operation came to light, the community rallied together to support the victims and seek justice. For instance, Danielle Saunders, a young woman from Farmingville, tragically became one of Raymond Rodeo's victims. Her story is a heartbreaking example of how vulnerable individuals can fall prey to the manipulation and exploitation of sex traffickers. Danielle's descent into Rodeo's clutches began innocently enough. Like many victims, she was targeted and groomed by Rodeo, who used drugs as a means of control. He lured her into a world of addiction, exploiting her vulnerability and dependence on substances. As Danielle became more entangled in Rodeo's web, he gradually coerced her into prostitution, forcing her to sell her body for his profit. During the routine traffic stop, law enforcement officers stumbled upon evidence that hinted at something far more sinister. Their instincts led them to dig deeper, and what they uncovered was beyond comprehension. The investigation led them to Raymond Rodeo's parents' basement, which had been transformed into a sex dungeon. As the officers descended into the basement, they were met with a scene straight out of a nightmare. The walls were adorned with chains and restraints, serving as a chilling reminder of the control Rodeo exerted over his victims. The air was heavy with a sense of fear and despair as the officers realized the extent of the suffering that had taken place within those walls. Raymond was involved in running a sex trafficking ring for approximately 4 years. He victimized over 20 women, subjecting some of them to degrading conditions where they were forced to use a bucket instead of a toilet. Although Rodeo's parents may have been aware of suspicious activities, they were not charged with a crime. In April 2019, Rodeo was arrested and later pleaded guilty to charges including sex trafficking and promoting prostitution.
Rodeo tried to take back his plea, called the case against him a travesty of justice, absolutely ridiculous, based on statements of people with no credibility. He argued with the judge, who called out the 48-year-old's obvious lack of remorse and warned he would eject Rodeo from the courtroom.
As a result, he has been sentenced to 9.5 years in prison. In addition, upon his release, Rodeo will be required to register as a sex offender and will be under court supervision for 5 years. But still, he didn't go down without a fight. He showed no remorse. Michelle Feldman and Thomas Williamson. Finally, in a groundbreaking case that has rocked the community, Michelle Feldman and Thomas Williamson, a couple from Reynoldsburg, have been convicted and sentenced for their involvement in a human trafficking operation.
A couple from Reynoldsburg headed to prison out of a human trafficking case. The judge handed Michelle Feldman a 7-year prison sentence today after she pled guilty to attempted human trafficking, extortion, and theft. Her fiancé, Thomas Williamson, was sentenced to 15 years.
This historic conviction marks the first time in Franklin County's history that individuals have been held accountable for human trafficking. Michelle Feldman, who pleaded guilty to attempted human trafficking, extortion, and theft, has been sentenced to 7 years in prison. Her fiancé, Thomas Williamson, received a more severe sentence of 15 years after pleading guilty to charges of human trafficking and sexual battery. Michelle Feldman and Thomas Williamson, the couple at the center of this shocking human trafficking case, had a background that seemed ordinary on the surface. Michelle Feldman, 31 years old, and Thomas Williamson, 34 years old, resided in Reynoldsburg, a quiet suburb in Franklin County. They appeared to be an average couple, blending into the community without raising any suspicions. However, behind closed doors, their true nature was far from ordinary. Michelle Feldman and Thomas Williamson were master manipulators, preying on vulnerable individuals for their own twisted desires. Their crimes involved a carefully orchestrated scheme that exploited the trust and innocence of their victims. Michelle Feldman, described as an intelligent and charismatic woman, played a pivotal role in the couple's operation. She possessed a cunning ability to create a false online identity, luring unsuspecting women into their trap. Using various social media platforms, Feldman would pose as a military man, fabricating a persona that would entice her victims. She would engage in conversations, building emotional connections with these women, ultimately leading them to believe they had found love and companionship. Thomas Williamson, on the other hand, was the enforcer in this disturbing partnership. With his imposing physical presence and manipulative tactics, he would ensure that their victims remained under their control. Williamson would use his fake military persona to establish a sense of trust, claiming to be the best friend of the military man they believed they were communicating with. This deception allowed him to lure the victims to their townhouse on White Birch Court in Reynoldsburg. Once the victims arrived at the couple's residence, the true horrors began. Michelle Feldman and Thomas Williamson subjected these women to a life of unimaginable suffering. They forced them into slave labor, exploiting their physical capabilities for their own financial gain. The victims were coerced into turning over their hard-earned money, with some even surrendering their Social Security income to the couple. The financial control exerted by Feldman and Williamson was just one aspect of their manipulation. The physical and emotional abuse inflicted upon the victims was equally horrifying. The women were subjected to physical violence, enduring beatings and other forms of punishment if they dared to resist or question the couple's authority. Additionally, they were coerced into engaging in sexual acts, not only with the couple, but also with other women in the house. The victims' autonomy and dignity were stripped away, leaving them trapped in a nightmarish existence. The extent of Michelle Feldman and Thomas Williamson's crimes became apparent when 3 brave women came forward to share their harrowing experiences. These women, whose identities remain protected, had all fallen victim to the couple's manipulative tactics during different periods between April 2013 and March 2015. Their stories shed light on the systematic abuse and exploitation that took place within the confines of the couple's rented Reynoldsburg home. The arrest of Michelle Feldman and Thomas Williamson on March 27, 2015, marked the end of their reign of terror. They were subsequently indicted the following month, and their crimes were brought to the attention of the justice system. The legal proceedings that followed would finally provide a glimmer of hope for the victims as they sought justice for the unspeakable horrors they endured. The investigation into Michelle Feldman and Thomas Williamson's human trafficking operation was a complex and meticulous process involving multiple law enforcement agencies and dedicated officers determined to bring the couple to justice. The shocking nature of the crimes committed by Feldman and Williamson demanded a thorough examination of the evidence and a relentless pursuit of the truth. It all began when the three courageous victims found the strength to come forward and share their stories of abuse and manipulation. Their testimonies provided the initial leads that set the investigation in motion. Reynoldsburg Police, led by Lieutenant Ron Wright, took charge of the case, recognizing the urgency and severity of the situation. The victims' accounts painted a disturbing picture of the couple's modus operandi. Michelle Feldman's online persona, posing as a military man, was the initial hook that drew the victims into their web of deceit. Lieutenant Wright and his team meticulously traced the digital footprints left behind by Feldman, uncovering a trail of evidence that would ultimately expose the true identities of the perpetrators. As the investigation progressed, it became evident that Michelle Feldman and Thomas Williamson had carefully planned their crimes, leaving little room for detection. However, the relentless efforts of law enforcement officers, combined with the determination of the victims to seek justice, would prove to be their downfall. Through extensive surveillance and the gathering of electronic evidence, the authorities were able to establish a clear pattern of criminal behavior. The victims' testimonies were corroborated by digital communications, financial transactions, and other incriminating evidence that linked Feldman and Williamson to the crimes committed against them. On March 27, 2015, the day of reckoning arrived. Michelle Feldman and Thomas Williamson were apprehended by law enforcement officers, their reign of terror finally coming to an end. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community as the true extent of their crimes began to unfold. Following their arrest, Feldman and Williamson were indicted the following month, paving the way for a trial that would expose the full extent of their depravity. They were charged with 1-count human trafficking, 1-count felonious assault, 3-count sexual battery, 2 counts extortion, 2 counts grand theft, and 1-count theft. The trial, which took place in a Franklin County court, revealed the shocking details of Michelle Feldman and Thomas Williamson's crimes. The prosecution, led by Assistant Prosecutor Jennifer Rausch, presented a compelling case, highlighting the systematic abuse, manipulation, and exploitation inflicted upon the victims. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Michelle Feldman chose to plead guilty to attempted human trafficking, extortion, and grand theft. Her decision to cooperate with the prosecution was a significant turning point in the case, as she agreed to testify against Thomas Williamson if his case went to trial. Thomas Williamson, on the other hand, also pleaded guilty, admitting to 1 count of trafficking and 2 counts of sexual battery. The guilty pleas marked a crucial step towards justice for the victims, ensuring that Feldman and Williamson would be held accountable for their heinous actions. The sentencing hearing, presided over by Common Pleas Judge Pat Sheeran, was a moment of reckoning for Michelle Feldman and Thomas Williamson. The prosecution and defense, in a rare agreement, recommended the respective sentences of 7 years for Feldman and 15 years for Williamson. Judge Sheeran, recognizing the severity of the crimes and the impact on the victims, imposed these sentences as part of the plea agreement. Throughout the hearing, Michelle Feldman maintained a stoic silence, offering no statement or apology for her actions. Thomas Williamson, too, chose not to speak, leaving many to wonder about the true extent of their remorse. The victims, though not present in the courtroom, found solace in the fact that justice had been served. Their bravery in coming forward and sharing their stories played a pivotal role in ensuring that Michelle Feldman and Thomas Williamson would face the consequences of their actions. In addition to the prison sentences, Michelle Feldman and Thomas Williamson will face additional consequences. Williamson will be required to register as a sex offender every 90 days for the rest of his life, ensuring that his actions are known to the community. This requirement serves as a safeguard against potential future offenses and provides a level of protection for the public. Thanks for watching. Click on the videos on your screen for similar content.